on in our right now. Okay, Barbara White. Thank you, Ilana. All right, let's get this started here. So I asked Rebecca after we met, I must tell you that when I went to speak with her, I had a totally different idea of what we were going to talk about. I thought we were going to talk about union organizing. And instead, instead I learned a whole lot about a whole range of things that had to do with working folks. One of which, and I know, Rebecca, you're going to talk about this, is language barrier, because I was very curious about that. So I'm just going to introduce Rebecca to you with a short bio that I asked her to send to me. And again, Rebecca, it was just what I needed. So if you don't mind me reading. Rebecca has been at Worker Justice Wisconsin since February 2020. She came to that position after teaching religious studies for several years at Edgewood College. She has a PhD in theology from Marquette, and her theological focus has been liberation and ecological theologies, with an emphasis on spirituality. She says, I was glad to join an organization doing on-the-ground work in worker justice with a solid connection to faith communities. I'm also happy to be working with Latinx, how do you say that? Latinx immigrants. I grew up in Argentina in Hialeah, Florida, where there were many immigrants from Cuba and other Latin American countries. It's nice to be in a place again where Spanish is so prevalent. In fact, listening to you speak when I was there, Rebecca, and to the other people in the office in such fluent Spanish made me wish that I knew more than mucho gusto. She says her most fundamental goal as a leader of Worker Justice Wisconsin is to develop a team of staff, volunteers, and workers who together collaborate, and there's the word that this is all about, collaborate to strengthen the working class and empower those who have been historically marginalized to be agents of their own change. So without further ado, I introduce you to Rebecca. Rebecca, you blew me away with all of the things that worker justice is involved in. So share with us. We're anxious to hear.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really happy to be sharing about this wonderful organization that I feel so privileged to be part of. I have certain things that I'm going to talk about, but please do not hesitate to interrupt me if you have any questions. I'm happy to have a conversational approach as I talk about the organization. So I'm going to, just because I'm a visual person, I'm going to share a couple flyers with you as I'm talking. I may, if you do raise your hand or whatever and I don't see you, then just interrupt me, okay? Because when I share screen, I can't see. All right, so let me just share my screen. I don't want to start with that one. Let's start with this one. Can everyone see this okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so Worker Justice Wisconsin is a Madison-based nonprofit that builds collective worker power together with faith and labor allies. That is our mission statement right there. The centerpiece of Worker Justice Wisconsin is our worker center, where non-unionized and mostly Latinx and immigrant workers come when facing issues such as wage theft and discrimination. So we are a worker center, which is different from a union in that, well, we're not a union, first of all. But we do work with people who don't have a union to start them thinking about collectively organizing and actually start doing it even before or even if they don't join a union. And that is because under the National Relations, NLRB, National Labor Relations Act, it's not just unions that are protected to do collective activity, but anybody, any two workers or more can collectively organize in their workplace, and they are protected by law to do so. And so, one thing that we talk about often is you are actually more protected as a worker when you are working together to make some kind of change in your workplace than if you try to do it by yourself. By yourself, we live in an at-will employment state, which means that you can be fired for almost any reason at any time. It also means, by the way, that you can leave your job at any time for any reason, no questions asked. So when you are collectively organizing, if you are if you're retaliated against in any way, and firing is one of them, though there are more subtle ways, then you will be protected by law. And so we get them started right away. We do collaborate with unions for support, and if the workers are interested, we will pass them on to the unions. We'll help them get organized into a union if they want. Oftentimes it doesn't go that way. And we work with faith communities, as I said, just to increase the power of the coalition around workers who are quite vulnerable in and of themselves. So let me just tell you a little bit more in terms of the statistics about Worker Justice Wisconsin and what we do. Of the workers who opened cases in 2021 through our Worker Center, 51% were female, 48% male, and 1% were non-binary. Over 90% were BIPOC. So this is historically marginalized communities. 83% of them were Latinx, 7.5% were African or African American, and 1% were Asian. Of those who opened cases in 2021, 80% said that their preferred language was Spanish, and 78 identified themselves as immigrants. For this reason, when you come into our Worker Center, the prevalent language there is Spanish. All of the Worker Center staff speak Spanish fluently and are in fact native Spanish speakers. And I do as well. If we speak a lot of Spanish and a lot of Spanglish, so we go back and forth because we do have members of the staff that speak primarily English. So there you have a sense of who the people are. Now, in terms of the cases that they tend to open, the majority are wage and hour. So that means wage theft. These are people, there's so many ways in which a person's wages may be stolen. Probably the most common we see is if they leave a job, either because they leave it or because they were dismissed or fired, and then they don't get their last paycheck. During the pandemic, we saw a bunch all at the same time of people that just didn't get their last paycheck at a time when they're very vulnerable. The second most common case that we deal with are discrimination cases. And then we deal with workers' comp or workers' safety. NLRB, these are cases where the workers organized and then were retaliated against, which we see quite a lot. And then last year we dealt with things like, directly COVID-19 issues and so on. The other number to highlight here is that in 2021, Worker Justice Wisconsin helped recover a total of $111,762.26 in basically stolen wages. Now, this year, to date, in 2022, that number is 119,000. So it's a bit higher than last year. It does go up and down a little bit, just depending on the circumstances. But we always average over 100,000. So in the history of our organization, we have helped recover over $2 million in stolen wages, which sounds like a lot, but to be honest, the more I learn, the more I know that it's just skimming the surface. I know that actually the amount of wage theft that goes on here in Madison and Dane County is much higher than that. So at least we can tackle some of it, and we continue to strive to be able to tackle more of it. I will tell you one thing that we don't have reflected in these numbers is a big shift that we have taken in the last. It's been a process, but really in the last year and a half, and then especially in the last 6 months, is we have progressively been changing the focus from helping individuals to really working more and more in building that collective worker power that I talked about at the beginning. And so in the last 6 months, we have organized 2 workplaces. One was a group of hotel workers, and they came in, there was some wage theft there. There were people that had been working there for a very long time, like 20 years, and hadn't gotten a pay raise in many, many years. And so when the person came in, we said, "Are other people in your workplace experiencing the same thing?" They said, "Oh, yes, this is a common problem." We said, "Great, bring them here, and we'll have a conversation. And then together you will decide what you want to do about it." They ended up bringing a group of 8 workers here. And what they decided they wanted to do was write a petition to management and then ask for a conversation, so that we could talk, so that they could talk about some of these issues. They could. We are not the leaders there. They are. We're there to support them. We do help translate, and just, train them for what it means to act collectively. As a result of that petition, management called a meeting, and even though they had told the workers, we want to talk with each of you individually, the workers said, no, you're going to talk to us collectively. And by the time they did that, it was about 20 workers that they were talking to. So we actually, many of us let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4 of us from Worker Justice Wisconsin went there just to support. And the conversation lasted about 2.5 hours. And at the end of that, the management offered a counter proposal, which the workers ended up accepting. So within the period of about 5 weeks, as a result of accepting that the management's counter proposal, they ended up with a $2 wage increase across the board. So per hour, $2 for every worker, even the ones that did not organize with them. So everybody benefits from this. That's why this is such a good process. So everybody at the hotel got a $2 raise per hour. Everybody at the hotel, all of the employees, got 3 additional floating holidays. And they also ended up with a 12-room cap per day. Hard to explain quickly, but essentially it was unpredictable. And because it was unpredictable, sometimes they were made to work 10 hours. And then sometimes they were made to work 4 hours, and they could never plan their schedule. By putting a room cap, it added a level of consistency that they really needed for their well-being and for the longevity of their work, right? So that was one of the places we organized. The second place that we've organized in the last 6 months is a t-shirt printing shop. And the abuses there were, they were tremendous. Probably the biggest one to mention is it was extremely hot in there. And the owner refused to use air conditioner. And do you remember during those really, really hot days in the summer when there were heat advisories? It was over 100 degrees in Madison. They were working inside a place that has machinery that goes up to 500 degrees. So it was extremely hot in there, and they weren't being provided water. It was hot. They brought in their own fans just to make it work, and there were a number of other issues. Now, this has been a much more difficult case because the owner was not happy to see their workers organize. And so he retaliated against them, and by basically letting everybody go as soon as they turned in their petition. And they picketed outside that place of work, saying basically, we're allowed to ask for more humane standard of work. And within the end of the week, they were back at work because the NLRB, the board that is assigned with upholding this act that I told you, had a conversation with the boss and said, what you're doing is illegal. And so they were back at work. Which was good, but it has been a continuous struggle because he has fought along the way at every step, which is unfortunate. However, at every step, the workers have stood together and they have been empowered to continue to advocate for themselves. And moreover, when they were picketing and throughout the process, they had a number of union members that were there with them to support them, and a number of faith leaders there with them to support them. So they were not alone, and they will not be afraid to, I think, stand up for themselves in the future, because they know that people do care and they are not alone. They actually just voted to enter a union. So that has not been, the ballots have not been counted totally yet, or have not been counted yet, but we expect that it will work in the favor of the union. So, okay. So I just told you about the Worker Center. Before I go on, are there any questions for me? Any thoughts or comments that you want to share with me?
Rebecca, I had, before we talked and listening to you again, the word collaboration is so evident in all of the work that you do. I think all of us are aware how difficult it is for people who are on the lower end of the pay scale to provide for their families, and they're afraid to quit their job. And so they seem to have no power at all. And so to me, it seems that your organization provides that emphasis that collaboration among workers can achieve a lot. And how would they ever know? I mean, I just think about these people working menial jobs, really, to support families, barely support them, and are too afraid to make noise for fear of being laid off. So how do you reach people to help them understand that collaboration about issues can make a difference? How do people find out?
We say it, so there's a number of things that we do. So everybody that has a conversation with us, no matter who it is, will know about the power of the collective. Will understand. I mean, you can't help it. It's just part of everything that we talk about here. The power of solidarity, the power of acting together. And so if you even call here, if you step into this door, you will know about it because it will be talked about. The other thing is that we offer a series of trainings. And every worker, so everything that we do, we talk about organizing, but for us, organizing is as much about education and training as anything else. So, the very first thing that we talk about is, first of all, you have rights. And I'm going to show you how we talk about that. No matter who you are, you have rights in the workplace. No matter your documentation status, no matter what, you have rights. And secondly, we talk about, there is power in the collective, and here's how to talk to your coworkers. Like, that is one of the first things we talk about, how to talk to your coworkers. Our training in full is 3 parts. So the first one talks about how to talk to your coworkers. The second one, more ways in which you collectively organize, just steps, very practical little steps that you can take that make a huge difference. And then the third one is focusing on the rights that you have by law, and also the limitations of the law, so that, if the law doesn't protect you in some way, then collectively organize to make that change. So we have that 3-part training. We also are developing a study guide for faith communities that will talk about much of the same stuff, going around different faith communities. We're working with the Wisconsin Council of Churches and a number of other sort of umbrella organizations and a number of congregations to develop this study guide, which will be used in churches to learn about what immigrant workers experience, about how to collectively organize, and about how to build a coalition around these workers to empower them further. So really, you can't escape it if you have contact with us. That's a really important part of what we do and what, frankly, worker centers do around the country.
Excuse me, Rebecca, am I to understand that there are actual laws in place that protect workers, even undocumented workers?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. All employment law protects all employees. So that includes anybody who is working. It is not dependent on documentation status, because the assumption of employment law is if you're working, you are working legally. We all know in this country that that's not the case. And by the way, we also know that the economy depends on these undocumented workers to remain stable. So the fact that it's illegal, in my mind, is criminal because the economy relies on them. But long story short, the employment law assumes that if you're working, you are working legally, and it will not ask for documentation status.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, there was one other thing I was going to mention and I forgot. Doesn't matter. It'll come up. Yes.
I had a question for you.
Yes.
How often do you have to employ the use of lawyers or the police in dealing with these employers, or have you been able to avoid that?
No, that's a very good question. We do refer to lawyers sometimes, depends on the case. If a discrimination case goes far enough, we will not deal with it, because then it gets complicated. And so those are referred to lawyers. Workers' comp cases, we don't even, we'll start, we'll take the information, but generally we cannot deal with workers' comp cases. That is workers' compensation for injury, because of the nature of the law. Employers who do not, when a person gets injured at work, they have to act very quickly to go to the doctor to prove that they were injured at work. Does that make sense?
No.
If they didn't do that, or their employer told them, no, that is not covered, 95% of the time, the employer is wrong, by the way, like blatantly wrong. But if they don't deal with it right away, they can't prove that they were injured at work. Do you see?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we have to get a lawyer involved. That's why for us, it's important for people to understand their rights even before they go into a place of work. because they have to deal with that so quickly. So workers' comp cases, after they've happened, those tend to go to lawyers as well. In
And do
terms
you
of,
have any on staff at Work
No.
and Justice?
we are not lawyers. We do not provide legal service. We have relationships with certain law firms that you know, they know that we're going to be referring people to them. So we do that. But again, our emphasis is let's train them before it happens, because if you deal with a workers' comp case within 24 hours, you're fine. You know, that's something we can help them do. But otherwise, yeah. So we focus on the education, and then we don't try to be the lawyers or try to hire lawyers.
Thank you.
Policemen, in terms of policemen have gotten involved only when there's a very, what do you call it? A very abusive boss. You know, when they refuse to back down, honestly, and not because the police can do anything, but only because the workers feel unsafe. You know, in that case, you know, we won't call the police like 911. We'll just say, you know, this is what we're doing. You know, you need to be aware of what's happening, you know, and they know that it's within, you know, the law. Say for the, you know, like last week, we had to call the police and just say, we're going to the place of employment because 8 people have not been paid their back wages. And so the employees were going there, like needing to get paid wages that they were owed, and the boss refused to pay, but they were afraid. So in that case, you know, the police was called to say, look, this is what we're doing, you know, just be aware, you know, and in that situation, because it's been a long-standing problem, the police decided to come with the workers. You know, so that's sort of the scenario that where the police may be called. Yes, Jennifer.
You hear me now? Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay, if you can scroll back a little bit, there was what I believe to have been an acronym on your screen early on. It was like, BIPOC. I need some help with that one.
Yeah. So, oh goodness, I'm gonna have to look that up myself because I forget. I often forget what it, you know, the actual. Oh, now I gotta move things around. Hold on.
Sorry.
No, you're good. So it's yeah. Here, let's just look it up. Black, Indigenous, and people of color, basically used to refer to members of non-white communities.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Rebecca, I have a question.
Yes.
The rights and protections that you are describing sound like they're so broad and inclusive. They apply also to teachers unions and state workers whose rights were, I understand, taken away by Walker and his friends a few years back.
Yeah. So there because of Act 10, there are certain limitations that have been put on unions. However, the right to collectively organize is a law from 1935. It's a much older law. And the NLRB has been there to protect collective organizing for a very long time. So the answer is, it's a little complicated. Here, let me put you on full screen and then I can stop share. So their rights are limited in some ways, but not their right to collectively organize, if that makes sense. So unions were weakened, but they were not, but those rights cannot be taken away. So I'm trying to be as concrete as possible. In terms of unions, because of restrictions that have come after 1935, unions can only do certain collective activity under certain conditions. So while they have the right to collectively organize, they have to meet certain criteria, right? So there's only certain instances in which they may picket, for example, without breaking the law. With Act 10, they were weakened further, and now, because Wisconsin became a right-to-work state, it just means that in a unionized place, a person does not have to join the union, does not have to pay union dues, does not illegally have to join the union if it's unionized in that workplace, but the union is legally obligated to represent them. So it's ripe for people paying less union dues because they know that they're going to be protected under the union anyway. Does that make sense? And the union in response cannot organize as freely because they have to abide by certain restrictions set on unions, for example, when to picket, okay? Long story short, what a union has, let me say it again. What we have as a worker center is that we do not fall, we are not restricted by the laws put on unions. Does that make sense? We can collectively organize under, excuse me, any circumstance, and we can picket under any circumstance. The thing that the union has that we don't have is bargaining power. So they can, once you have a union, you can enforce a contract with your employer. And by that, they have to agree with you through a process of bargaining that you are going to abide by certain rules in the workplace, right? We cannot do that. So the answer is a bit complicated. What laws have weakened, but they do still have rights to collectively organize and collectively bargain. Yeah. Anything else before I move on? Okay, so let me go ahead and share the screen again. And let's see if I can find what I was sharing. Okay, so very quickly, beyond the Worker Center, Worker Justice Wisconsin cultivates relationships with faith and labor leaders, as well as other community organizations, such as Bonnie Margulis's organization, Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice, which Pat, you mentioned at the beginning of the hour. So we collaborate with these different organizations to build a coalition around workers' rights. WJW, or Worker Justice Wisconsin, aspires to cultivate worker-led organizational efforts that result in systemic change while building a coalition of community allies to stand behind workers as they advocate for justice. This includes a just and living wage for all, paid time off for all, affordable health care and adequate coverage for all, workplaces free from all forms of discrimination and harassment. That's one we have to deal with head on right away, like often, unfortunately. Opportunities for collective organizing without fear of retaliation, and a healthy work-life balance for all people, regardless of race, gender, national origin, immigration status, or creed. Now, there are three major components that are part of everything we do. The first one is education. So we educate workers, religious congregations, and the broader community on workers' rights and advocacy. So I talked about how we do that workers' rights three-part training. I talked about how we're forming this study guide for congregations of different religious traditions. We also have a training on worker cooperatives, which are worker-led, democratic places of work. And we incubate cooperatives of workers. Say a group of workers comes to us and says, you know, we want to own a baking business, a bakery, and we want to do it in a very like democratic way. We want to share responsibility. You know, we're like, great. You know, we'll teach you how to do a cooperative. We have partners with community organizations that will help you, and then you can have your business and run it as a cooperative. So we've incubated so far 3. One is a translating interpretation cooperative. Another one is a restaurant cooperative. And the third one is a cleaning cooperative. So that's something else that we do. No matter what it is, though, education is a central piece because people need to know that they have rights. Like Pat said, people don't know. People need to know that they have rights. People need to know that collectively they have power, right? And so it's just built into everything that we do. We also have partnerships with other area organizations, like we do trainings at Justine, at the Catholic Multicultural Center, and at the Latino Academy, for exactly this, collectively organizing, knowing your rights, etc.
I find it very interesting that one of the ways to reach these people, these workers, is through the faith community, through church groups, because where else do people gather really than to form a community? For many is around their church. So yeah, very interesting.
Yes, that's absolutely true. That is a major community point. Another one is food, so we'll go outside of like Mexican markets and flyer there because people always gather around food,
Yes.
So yeah, but faith community is a really important piece of it for us. So the other thing that we do, and I've talked so much about, is the collective worker organizing. So we fight workplace injustice by partnering with low-wage and immigrant worker leaders for collective actions and campaigns. And here you just see some pictures from I believe this was a membership meeting. So we do a lot of different ways. We have a lot of different ways of gathering people. One is through the trainings. Another one is through our membership meetings, our worker membership meetings, and this is a time when we get together and eat together and talk about, the issues we're facing and how we can, collectively do something for the better, so it's a really empowering time. And finally, again, I've mentioned this a lot, the third piece that we have put into everything we do is community building. So we mobilize a coalition of individuals and unions and faith communities and community organizations to stand with workers as they lead campaigns and struggle for justice. And I mean, this is really important. When these t-shirt shop workers had to picket because they were kicked out of work for organizing illegally, they were doing that legally. They were kicked out of work illegally. The workers couldn't believe how much support there was from the community. The fact that faith leaders were out there, the fact that union leaders were out there standing with them, chanting with them, that's like, wow, I'm not alone. That's amazing. And other workers, like the hotel workers that organized Worker Justice Wisconsin, they came out and supported the t-shirt shop workers. So they're like, wow, we're together. That's really important. The other thing is that we have a solidarity fund. This is a fund that is goes directly to the workers who are organizing if they are retaliated against and cannot work due to that retaliation. And so when the t-shirt shop workers were out, we had started the Solidarity Fund a week before. Like, it's a very new thing. And we had like $388 in there. That is not enough to help people. And rent was due, and some of them were due 6 weeks of back wages because the employer had not paid their wages. And we thought, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? They were forced to go on strike. And we put it out to the community. And within a week, people had donated $7,000, which was enough to cover their rent for that month. I mean, that's tremendous, you know, it's tremendous, not just practically, but psychologically what it does to people, to be like, I thought I was alone. I'm not, you know. So in terms of combating fear, Pat, which you mentioned earlier, that's a big piece of it is, oh my goodness, I am not alone. We are not alone. We're standing together and the community is standing with us. That's why community building is so important. So I want to show you some of the rights that every worker has. We're not going to go through this because it's kind of, this sheet is really full. But I wanted to show you this because right away, when workers come in, we say, let's do the training, and that's how to talk to your coworkers. But at the same time, we give them a packet. And this piece of literature right here, this one sheet thing, this one sheet piece is something that is in that packet. And we say, take that out and put it on your fridge so that you can refer to it at all times. We have this in English, Spanish, and Mandarin. And so, you know, you see the right to organize. This is legally what you have. You know, you have the right. I gotta move this. You have the right to agreed upon pay in a timely manner. And, you know, we show them 21 examples of ways in which wages are stolen in the workplace. And that can absolutely, we can not only file a complaint with the government for, but we can organize around. And we talk about the right to a discrimination-free workplace. Not all forms of discrimination are protected, or are, no, let me put it, not all classes are protected. So not all forms of discrimination are illegal. That's important to know. But there are many ways in which many ways in which an employer cannot discriminate against you. And that's what we talk about here. So right away, they have this in front of their face. They know, and they know that they have the right to a safe workplace. Again, this is by law, and this is for every single employee in this country, no matter who they are, right? So immediately, they know their rights. Now, the second page is call us, we can help you. Or if you just want to file a complaint yourself, it's not that complicated. You can file the complaints right here.
Actually, we've had somebody from the Department of Civil Rights
Oh, good.
speak to us a few years ago about the kinds of services they offer. So, it's hard for people like us to put all this information together and understand what's available. It's amazing.
So it's just one place, and that's true for all of us. I mean, and the information changes. So this is our cheat sheet, and we give it to everybody who comes to the door. You know, this is how you know, there are many more rights than this, but these are the ones that people most often deal with. And so, there it is, yeah, and we'll share that. It's on our website. If you go to our website, we share this when we go into faith communities, because even if people in the faith communities don't know anybody that's suffering from these problems, or they themselves aren't, they may pass it on to somebody who does, or maybe some of them are employers and they didn't even realize, oh goodness, that's protected. I better change this. Because sometimes employers do things not intentionally, right? So it's a good opportunity for employers as well, I think, to have that sheet. So I've given you a lot of information. What else would you like to know about Worker Justice Wisconsin?
Rebecca, when we spoke, I asked you about language barriers. And you explained to me, or I believe you said, there is no such thing as a language barrier. And so would you share your thoughts about that? Because so many of us think, oh, why don't they learn English if they're going to work here in the United States? Why don't they learn English so that they can communicate with their employers. So you had some very interesting responses, and I'd like you to share those with us.
Yeah. So I think one of the things to be well aware of is that in terms of language barriers, employers will sometimes seek out employees who they believe will not understand the situation in order to exploit it. It sounds rough, but we see this. In the construction industry, for example, it is not uncommon to misclassify workers. So people who are, by every definition of the law, they are employees, okay? Which means they should be receiving a certain wage. They should be receiving certain benefits. They should be covered by workers' comp insurance, for example. But they are persuaded to become contractors when they are in fact not a contractor, so that the employer does not have to pay taxes or doesn't have to pay for their workers' comp and other things. They don't have to pay taxes. And they say, well, we communicated it clearly, but they didn't, and they know they didn't. They know they didn't, and we know because it has been explained to them. This is, to the employer, this is illegal. You need to communicate clearly with the employee. First of all, you are intentionally misclassifying because you know that they're an employee. The way you're treating them is your other employees. Therefore, they are employees. But second of all, and in fact, the governor had a whole task force to study the issue because it was such a big problem. But the second thing is, they will we know they target Latino, Spanish-speaking immigrants precisely because they expect that they won't understand the system and they won't understand them. Do you see what I'm saying? So language barrier is used as a weapon, and it is not unintentional. Now, sometimes it is. I will concede to that, and there are language barriers. But what I want to stress is in my job in 3 years, I have seen it be used as a weapon more often than not. The second thing to mention is, yes, I get it. People want them to speak English. Learning a language is hard. And a lot of these folks are taking English classes. And sometimes understand a lot more than they let on because they're embarrassed to speak English, because they're afraid that they're going to sound dumb, right? And I've met many native English speakers learning another language who suffer from the same problem when speaking the other language. The third thing to mention is that we have a lot of people who are only here for a time. They're just come here to earn enough money for their families, and then they go back to their home country. They never intend to stay here. They just intend to get their families out of poverty. And that's fair, I guess, right? So they may not make the effort to learn the English because they're going to go right back. All I want to say is that the issue is complicated, and nobody suffers from that language barrier more than the workers themselves.
And I think you also told me that even though there is a difficulty there in terms of communicating, that there's always a way. There's always a way to communicate your need if you're a worker, or to communicate what the employer wants done. That seems always to work, even if somebody doesn't speak the language. And I was referring to, restaurant employees, so many of which are Spanish speaking, and my experience from California, so many of them were Spanish speaking in the back of the house, but not in the front of the house. They managed to get along just fine. So
yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Pat. I mean, when there's a will, there is a way. There is a way to communicate. And we see this because we see good employers too. And it's fine. There's ways to communicate, depending on the job. But in most situations, you can communicate it. The problems where the language barrier happens is because from my perspective, there isn't enough of an effort to ensure that people understand. So let me just give you an example. We had workers from a cleaning company. Now, there was a bad situation at work, and there were enough people on staff that were bilingual that when they wanted to communicate what needed to be done, they would have a bilingual person on staff communicate that, and there was no problems. There was no problems. New management came in, and problems started to happen because this management, the manager was yelling at people, which, come on, unnecessarily. But then when they went to have a conversation with HR, the person that was wanting to talk to HR said, please wait until one of my bilingual coworkers can come with me. And the person in HR said, okay. They scheduled a conversation at a time when both workers could be there, the bilingual person and the person that didn't speak English, right? And management ended up canceling that meeting, just saying, okay, we're going to have to reschedule. Waited for the bilingual person to leave, and then brought the person that couldn't speak English to have the conversation. Do you see what I'm saying? This is why I'm saying it's done. There's a level of intentionality here. And they did this twice, right? So intentionally brought the person in without a person that could actually translate for them. And the results were disastrous. So what I'm saying is, oftentimes there is a way, and we have seen that way be avoided for no real reason. I don't mean to speak ill of someone, but it's just when you see that happen more than twice, more than 3 times, more than 5 times, you start to see a pattern. And that's where I come from when I say that the barrier is not as big as it's sometimes made out to be.
Good. I have to say, there are a number of issues that you alluded to and that you talked about, and one of them is collaboration. Paul Fanlin, who's one of the from the Capital Times, came and spoke to us, I think in January, and he talked about he had 8 things he talked about. One of the most important things he said that I've retained in my mind is that protests make things happen. That people coming together collaboratively can make change. And you've alluded to that in a way I hadn't considered, thinking about a faith community or a number of faith communities organizing together collaboratively to support issues that people have. And it reminds me of the civil rights movements, of course, of the 60s, when we saw so many faith leaders at the marches of all kinds of faith. So I thought that was important. I also look at education. We think that there's no way around some of this, but to let people know what their rights are, what power that can give an individual for those who are willing to exercise it. And then again, it's that collaboration that creates the will in many cases. So I just feel one of the things that I've been always so frustrated about in this community of Wisconsin is the lack of collaboration among helping agencies, among agencies that are put in place to assist people who need that help. And I've ignored I've ignored the idea of faith communities, but I can see now how, your church, where you go to church, and there are people behind you can make such a difference. So thank you for that. I've learned a lot. I hope you guys have too. And Rebecca, I have to tell you that this conversation about the rights of people, I think I told you we are supporting this year blank communities. What is it, Jen?
Open doors
Open
for
doors.
Yes, open doors for refugees. I mean, this gives us a whole nother look at what's available for people who come to this country seeking just a good life. So really,
Yeah.
thanks so much. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I have a quick comment.
Yeah.
And our question, and that is, I wonder if any thought has been given, and maybe it's inappropriate for one reason or another, but distributing those sheets that you had, the workers' rights at ESL language or ESL classes.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because that's something I wanted to say, is that a lot of the people that we deal with, this goes to your comments also, Pat, why don't they learn English? There are in ESL classes. They are literally taking English classes. And that's why we collaborate with the Latino Academy, which is probably the main place where people go to learn English. So we partner definitely with ESL places, Madison Community College as well, where they do ESL. Absolutely. Yeah. Very good.
Good. And I know you all work with Centro Hispano.
Yep.
Yes, we had people come from Centro Hispano a couple of different times talking about the loneliness of immigration, the loneliness of people outside, who are living in a community that's outside their own cultural thing, the missing of their families, that kind of thing. So to think that there are groups that are ready to support them in their efforts, it really is hopeful. So yeah, thanks for all the good work you do. It's just the beginning, I think, of us learning all about it. So thank you, Rebecca. We'll be in touch with you, finding out more in the time. So thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Ilana, as usual.